Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Captain's Vlog, the podcast for fierceturtle.co.uk, an independent blog for Clipper crew in training. Today, very briefly, I'm going to talk about dry suits and whether or not they are worth considering. First of all, though, I think it's worth looking at what you actually get in terms of being race crew and my understanding of what you get, which of course may change from race to race. Normally, the race sponsor, who is currently Musto, will provide specific kit, and that will be based around their Ocean. Normally, I think it's the HPX brand for Musto. Their Ocean kit, which is a shell. It's usually Gore-Tex, and it's designed specifically to keep you dry, or as dry as possible. And because it's Gore-Tex, it breathes, so it stops water getting in and lets a certain element of moisture evaporate through the Gore-Tex and get out. And the kit is technically very good. I'm a big fan of Musto, which is great because obviously I do work from time to time for Clipper, so it's nice to be able to say nice things about their current kit sponsors. And of course there are other good suppliers out there. So let's just have a look at why you might consider a dry suit and the pros and any cons that might exist. First off then, what does a dry suit do? Why does it work? Well, the clue is in the title. It largely keeps you dry. There is potential for you to sweat inside the dry suit, so there is going to be some element of moisture probably inside a dry suit, especially if you're working hard. But again, some dry suits are Gore-Tex and the more expensive ones, and therefore they do breathe to some extent and stop water coming in but let moisture leave. Most people know that if you're wet you will get colder quicker. I think I've read somewhere that you lose something like 25 times more heat when wet than when dry. So that's a massive and significant problem if you're wet in any environment, but especially in a cold environment. So even on deck, a dry suit should keep you drier and therefore warmer. My personal experience was that when you're on deck, as long as you wear your shell, your normal foulies, if you wear them well, in other words, you make sure that you seal up everything up, the neck and the smock and the waist and everything else, and you have a decent pair of boots and something on your head to keep your head warm, then my experience was that foulies work pretty well on deck, and I don't think you need a dry suit when on deck. If you're going to be on the foredeck a lot, then you are going to get wetter. But sailing in an open ocean in big weather you're going to get wet to some extent wherever you are on the deck. So I think the big thing really is what happens if you go into the water. Now, of course, going overboard, which is what we're talking about, is a very significant danger. Once you're in the water, you only have a limited amount of survival time. This varies dependent on body type and person and the environment within which you find yourself, but some people have survived a very long time indeed in very cold weather. Even during the 79 Fastnet there were several people that were found in the water after several hours and were still alive. Now unfortunately in most cases they then suffered from something caused by hydrostatic shock, which is something you will have learned about in your sea survival. But in terms of keeping you alive, a dry suit will obviously keep you warmer and therefore reduce that heat loss. You need to make sure though that you wear warm clothing underneath, and that goes into layering, which I've talked about in episode 1. So what sort of sea temperatures are we talking about where this is specifically a problem? Well, probably anything up to about 10 degrees centigrade. So most oceans are going to be 3 to 10 degrees centigrade at some point during the year. And that's considered pretty cold. If you go into that sort of water without a dry suit, then you can expect that you're going to be losing dexterity very quickly and mental acuity, and within 30 to 60 minutes you'll be entirely exhausted or even unconscious. And of course, once you're unconscious in the water, you can't protect yourself from waves, etc. That's why we wear a hood in our dry suit, in our life jackets. That's why we pull a hood over us to help to protect us against waves coming over the mouth. So, is a dry suit worthwhile? I think the answer is it's an insurance policy, and if you can afford a dry suit, and if you're sailing in a cold ocean, and by that I probably mean if you are going to be on parts of leg 1, leg 2, leg 3, leg 4, even parts of leg 5, well, probably leg 5 is now warm because you're not, as I understand it, going up to Qingdao these days. So leg 5 probably be okay. Leg 6, certainly. Leg 7, the beginning of leg 7, and parts of leg 8. So there are cold ocean elements to all of those, but the Southern Ocean and the North Pacific are the specific very cold ones, with the South Atlantic and the Southern Ocean leg on leg 2 also being relevant. So should you wear one? Should you spend the money on one? Well, it's going to come down to more than just that, I suppose. The thing is, you're also limited in terms of the amount of kit that you can carry on board, because there's only limited space. So you have to start thinking, well, if you're going to carry a dry suit, are you also carrying your other Fowler shell, which you probably would want to, in which case you're carrying 2 lots of Fowlers, which does take up quite a bit of space. There are ways around that. You could go for something called a mid-layer dry suit. Ursuit do an MPS, which is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Those are cheaper. They are designed to go over your warmer layers and under your shell, your existing shell. So they're worth considering. They're probably about €700, something like that. Fierce Turtle sell them, although limited amount in stock at the moment. And I've heard rave reviews from those people that have bought them. They weigh about 1 kilo and they pack down to the size of a very small sleeping bag, sort of camping sleeping bag. So they are quite efficient and quite useful in that respect. They're Gore-Tex, and they have, which brings me on to something else, they have neoprene seals. So if you have a latex allergy, you may just find that neoprene will get around that problem. That's something you'd obviously have to look at yourself. Neoprene is a stiffer, sort of waterproof, wetsuit style material, so it's thicker and stiffer. Latex is much softer, probably more susceptible to damage. In some ways more comfortable because it's not so stiff, but it's also tighter, so it's normally tight around your neck, which can be uncomfortable. So you have to pay your money and take your choice, but certainly it's worth considering options when it comes to dry suit. The other thing is, in terms of costs, yeah, I mean, dry suits are normally, well, they can vary dramatically, but they're probably from about €600 or €700 up to about, or €2,000 or €3,000. And my understanding is that sort of the Musto HPX is probably something like about £1,000. Although if you're Clipper crew listening to this, my understanding there is that you get a discount. So another option is to buy second-hand. Fierce Turtle have a second-hand page, which some of you may have seen, with pre-used kit, and there are several dry suits on there at any one time, as there are also ocean sleepwear, sleeping bags, and boots, and other bits and pieces. So if you're on a budget, or you just don't like throwing money down the toilet, it's worth considering good quality second-hand kit. And I would refer you to the Fierce Turtle pre-used pages to have a look at that. There's a private adverts by members of Fierce Turtle. One other thing which is probably worth just mentioning is ease of use and convenience. Obviously, when you're on a race yacht or any yacht, you are expected to be on deck for your watching good time, and given that you're likely to be in some sort of watch system, possibly 4 hours on, 4 hours off, using your off watch time to greatest effect, i.e. eating, sleeping and washing, means that you want to leave it to the last possible minute, most people do anyway, to get out of your bunk. And if you've got to put a dry suit on, it's going to add a little bit of time to getting ready, especially in a crowded saloon area below decks when you're all trying to get on deck at the same time, and perhaps some of you are still eating, etc. So that's the only other thing I would mention, is that in terms of ease of use, I found that getting a dry suit on and off took longer, and if there's an all hands call to deck, you're probably going to go for your normal Fowleys rather than a dry suit, simply because it's going to take that much longer to get on deck. So that was my experience, and that's generally what I felt happened. I just felt guilty spending more time than everybody else getting ready, and obviously it's a cardinal sin to get to deck after the watch change. So something worth considering is that ease of use with a dry suit is also potentially an issue. So in conclusion, is it worth it? It's an insurance policy. If you go in the water and you're not clipped on for whatever reason, which would obviously be your first option, is to stay clipped, then your biggest next danger is going to be exposure and hypothermia. And if you go over in harsh conditions, which is when you're most likely, of course, to go overboard at night in big weather, getting back to you and getting you out of the water successfully is a challenge. It's something, of course, that all crews train for on a regular basis, and so it's something that you should be pretty confident is going to be in your favour, but it can take time. And getting back to somebody in those conditions can be difficult, and to pick them out of the water more so. So time is what you need to buy, and that's what a dry suit gives you. Dry suit's going to perhaps extend your survival time by, well, off the top of my head, I'd say probably 300%. So whereas without a dry suit in very cold water, you might be looking at 30 to 60 minutes as a maximum. In a dry suit with proper mid layers, etc., you could be looking at extending that by 300%, so 3 times longer. And if no one plans to go overboard, so if you are that unfortunate person that goes overboard and for some reason or other you're not clipped on, then you might well find that a dry suit is that one thing that just saves your life. So it's a tricky one. To some extent, I'd say it depends on where you're going to be on the boat. If you're going to be on the foredeck a lot, which is obviously a more active and more exposed part of the boat, then it's certainly worth considering, especially on the colder legs, the Southern Ocean and North Pacific legs. If you're going to be on some of the warmer legs, like leg 1, leg 7, where most of the leg is warm, leg 5, then a dry suit, leg 5 a dry suit's really of no point at all. The heat is the problem with leg 5. So the same in most of leg 1 and the most of leg 7. So, and even large parts of leg 8. So, correction, no, not leg 8, leg 7. So you need to think about it long and hard, I suppose. I had one after leg 1 on the 2011 12 race. I bought a Musto HPX just because I was on the foredeck a lot, and it's pretty wet up there. So I wore it probably 35% of the time when I was on deck, and bizarrely the few times that I really could have done with it when we had very bad weather and we were sort of knocked down or things like that, I didn't actually have the dry suit on. So I was lucky in that I was fortunate that I didn't go overboard, and therefore it didn't need to be tested to its fullest extent. But from a comfort perspective, I wouldn't have said it kept me noticeably drier on deck, or noticeably warmer. In fact, if anything, it's slightly thinner material in my experience, and the smock and the salopettes probably work better, keeping the wind off you. So that's probably as far as I need to go with this. Don't want to make this longer than it needs to be. So I will be addressing some other bits and pieces over the next few weeks on different episodes, including the pros and cons of some of the legs that I haven't mentioned in previous blogs. And I hope that this is of some interest to you. If you want to subscribe, then please do so. If you would like to send me a voice message through the Anchor FM app, then just download the app onto your phone, and then you'll be able to follow me on that app and send messages to me. You can post messages on the YouTube channel, where this is also posted, and I will put some useful links in the description box relating to dry suits. Thanks again for listening, and please subscribe if you haven't already.